Chosen one, the loudest person in the room is rarely the most dangerous. True power resides in the one who stops reacting. The reality is sinking in for them. You've been too quiet lately. Now they're realizing you're not to be messed with. By choosing peace over performance, you have already won. There was a version of you that showed up completely. Every time you were present, you were available, you engaged, you explained, you defended, you cared, you gave your energy freely, because that's what you do. That's the nature of someone built the way you are built. When you are in, you are all the way in. And certain people learned how to use that. They learned that your consistency meant access, that your presence meant they could predict you, that your emotional availability meant they could reach in and pull a reaction whenever they needed one. They figured you out, or thought they did. They mapped your patterns, identified your triggers, and quietly built a playbook designed to keep you exactly where they needed you, visible, reactive, and just uncertain enough about yourself to stay in the dynamic. This is the setup. This is what was being constructed around you while you were focused on being genuine. And here is the first thing you need to understand about that setup, the thing that changes everything when you see it clearly. They only had power over you because you were participating. The whole operation ran on your engagement. Without your presence, without your reactions, without your energy flowing into the machine has nothing to run on. You didn't know that yet, but you were about to find out, because something was building in you, quietly, under the surface, a realization that was still taking shape, that didn't have words yet, but that was growing with every interaction that cost you more than it gave, every moment that left you drained instead of full, every time you found yourself defending something that shouldn't have needed defending, explaining something that was never genuinely in question, performing for an audience that had already decided what they believed. Something in you was keeping count, and the count was getting high. You felt it in the exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. You felt it in the way certain conversations left you hollow before they even finished. You felt it in the specific quiet dread of seeing a particular name appear on your screen. You were not just tired of them, you were tired of the version of yourself that kept showing up for them, the version that kept believing the next interaction would be different, that kept hoping the investment would eventually return something real, that kept giving the benefit of the doubt to people who had already spent every doubt you ever gave them on more of the same. That version of you had been remarkably patient, remarkably unaware of something crucial, that the patience and the generosity, as long as they kept flowing outward without limit, were not virtues in this particular situation. They were vulnerabilities. They were the open door through which everything that was supposed to stay out kept walking in. And one day, not dramatically, not with a speech or a declaration or a moment anyone could point to and say, there, that's when it changed. You just stopped. You went quiet. Not as strategy. Not yet. At first it was simply protection. A closing of the door, not because you planned what would happen next, but because something in you, something ancient and instinctive and finally loud enough to hear, said, enough. No more performance. No more justifying yourself to people who have decided what they believe. No more spending your real life on relationships that only function when you are the one bleeding. You went quiet, and the whole game changed in an instant. They just didn't know it yet. Neither did you, not fully, not yet. What you didn't know in that moment was that your quiet was about to become the most instructive thing that ever happened to everyone who had been taking you for granted. Because silence, when it comes from someone who has been endlessly available, is not neutral. It is a message, and the message it sends to every person who depended on your presence without honoring it is this: what you had access to was never guaranteed, and now the access is closed. The first thing that happened when you went quiet, the very first thing, is that they lost their footing, and they didn't even understand why. Here is what access actually means in a dynamic like theirs. Access is not just the ability to talk to someone. Access is control. As long as they could reach into your world through conversation, through provocation, through the network of people around you, they could move things, they could shape narratives, test boundaries, read your responses, calibrate their next move. Your presence gave them a constant stream of real-time information about where you stood, what you were feeling, and what they could get away with next. When you went quiet, that stream cut off completely. If this resonates with your inner knowing, hype this video to help fellow chosen ones find their way here. Overnight they lost their ability to predict you, their ability to provoke you, their ability to control the story by watching how you responded to the things they set in motion. And in place of all of that data, all of that access, all of that control, they got nothing, just silence. Just the unnerving, disorienting experience of reaching for something that used to always be there and finding empty air. Now here is where it gets interesting, because most people, when they lose access to something, adjust and move on. But not people like the ones who were in your orbit. People who built their entire sense of power on your engagement don't just adjust, they start to unravel. Without your reactions to feed off of, they had to sit with themselves. And that sitting with themselves, with no moving target to focus on, with no ongoing drama to manage, with no story about you to tend to, turned out to be something they were completely unprepared for, because when the noise stopped, what was left was the truth, their choices, their behavior, the things they had done and said, the way they had treated you. And with no competing noise from your direction, those truths started getting very, very loud. This is the first domino. Remember it. It matters for everything that comes next. You have to understand something about the people who thrive on chaos and manipulation. They are not running toward anything. They are running away. The drama they create, the narratives they control, the constant maneuvering to keep others destabilized, all of it serves one primary function: distraction from themselves, from their choices, from the parts of who they are that they are not ready to face. As long as you were engaged, you were the perfect distraction. They could focus on you instead of on themselves. They could talk about your reactions instead of their actions. They could make the story about what you were doing rather than what they had done. You, without meaning to, without choosing to, were giving them a way to avoid themselves every single time you showed up and responded. Your silence removed that escape. Look, you already know the attacks weren't random. And if you're paying attention, you can feel it. Their walls are closing in. You've also noticed something else. A lot of Chosen One channels on YouTube have gone quiet, videos removed, voices pushed off the platform. The mainstream media is cracking down on us, but we will not give up our voice. So let's talk about what we're doing about it. That's why I built Destiny Engine. And when you join, you're not just supporting your favorite channels, you're also fueling your own rise. It's a 360 win. It generates personalized sequences that help you rewire betrayal into transcendence, turn isolation into sacred power, and transform their downfall into your rise. We are using the Dark Elite's own weapons against them, taking their declassified consciousness technology that programmed competition and scarcity and repurposing it to serve cooperative intelligence. The beauty is, you don't even have to lift a finger. You put on the headphones, press play, and your subconscious is rewired while your enemies collapse under the weight of their own lies. This is why I created it in the beginning, so everything they did to break you becomes fuel for your purpose. The collective upgrade is underway. Start your Destiny Engine for $7 today and watch divine justice accelerate in your life. Link in the description. All of a sudden, there was nothing to point at, no ongoing drama to manage, no response from you to critique or twist or use as justification for whatever they needed to justify. The space that used to be filled with you and the dynamic between you was now just empty, and in that emptiness, everything they had been running from started closing in. This is what's happening to them in their quiet moments right now, not the anger they're probably performing outwardly, the private discomfort, the memories that play back without distortion, the knowledge creeping in slowly, insistently, that the distance between you is not something you created. They created it, and they know it. They may not admit it. They may double down on the performance of being wronged, of being the victim, of you being the one who abandoned ship. But underneath all of that, in the still honest place that every person has, whether they want to or not, the accounting is happening. And every day your silence continues. The accounting gets louder. Here is what guilt looks like when it has nowhere to go. It does not sit quietly. It moves. It shapeshifts. It looks for exits. You will see it in the way they suddenly become very vocal about your flaws to anyone who will listen. Not because your flaws are news, but because broadcasting your flaws creates the noise they need to drown out what they know about their own. You will see it in the sudden revisionism, the way the story of what happened between you gets retold in versions that move further and further from what actually occurred. Every retelling is a little more favorable to them. Every version places you a little more firmly in the role of the one who caused this. Watch for this, not because it should upset you, it shouldn't, and we will get to why, but because it is the most reliable signal that your silence is doing exactly what it is supposed to do. People do not aggressively rewrite stories that they are comfortable with. They only rewrite the ones that indict them. The fact that they are rewriting yours means your quiet has gotten under their skin in a way that nothing else could have. Your words, your arguments, your attempts to correct the record when you were still engaging, all of that gave them something to debate, to dismiss, to use as evidence of your emotional state. But your silence gives them nothing to work with except their own conscience. And their conscience, it turns out, is not their ally right now. You are not doing this to them. You are simply absent. And your absence has become the mirror they cannot look away from. The guilt is not a weapon you are wielding. It is a consequence they are living. And there is a profound difference between the two. One is revenge, the other is justice. And you, chosen one, are in the business of justice now. You have been changing. Not the kind of change that happens when someone breaks, the kind that happens when someone decides, when someone looks at the life they have been living, the dynamics they have been tolerating, the version of themselves they have been performing for other people's comfort, and makes a decision that there is no going back from. You stopped playing defense. That is the change. That is the whole thing. When you were reactive, you were always playing defense, always one step behind whatever they set in motion, always in the position of responding to a world you were not directing. Even when you were right, even when you were justified, even when you had every receipt, you were still on their court, playing their game, fighting on terrain they had chosen and prepared. Your silence moved the fight. Without announcement, without warning, you simply stopped showing up to the battlefield they built for you. And here is what this means strategically. Pay attention, because this is the part they still haven't figured out. They were ready for a fight. They had everything staged. The arguments they had rehearsed, the narratives they had preceded with anyone who would listen, the pressure points they had spent months mapping. They were coiled and waiting for you to step into the arena so they could do what they always did on their home turf. You didn't step in. You walked past the arena entirely and started building something in a space they don't even know exists. While they stand there ready to fight a battle you have already left, you are somewhere else entirely, working, growing, moving at a speed and in a direction they cannot monitor. And here is what you are actually building in that space. You are building the life that the chaos was always costing you. Think about the mental and emotional real estate that used to be occupied by managing their behavior, anticipating the next move, bracing for the next disruption, running through conversations in your head that hadn't happened yet, rehearsing your defense against accusations that hadn't been made yet. That real estate is yours now, all of it, reclaimed. What does a chosen one do with reclaimed real estate? They build. They invest in what was always supposed to be the priority, the work, the vision, the relationships that are actually reciprocal, the parts of themselves that went undernourished for every season they spent pouring into dynamics that were taking without giving back. You are building all of that now. In the quiet, in the space that silence created, and it is compounding in ways that will become undeniable, not because you announce it, but because compound growth eventually becomes visible, regardless of whether you draw attention to it. They are still throwing punches at empty air, still making their moves on a board where your pieces have already been removed, still trying to read a script you are no longer performing, and the longer it takes them to realize this, the further ahead you get. Something happened to you during the quiet, something that goes beyond the strategic and into something deeper. Your frequency shifted. This is not metaphor for the sake of sounding spiritual. This is the most practical thing in this entire story. Because here is what happens when a person spends real, committed, uninterrupted time investing in themselves rather than managing other people's chaos. They change at a fundamental level, not just in behavior, in energy, in the way they carry themselves, in the quality of stillness they bring into any room. You have that now, and the people who used to be able to get to you can feel it. They try the old methods, the provocations, the subtle jabs sent through indirect channels, the stories stirred up with mutual connections, the sudden contact after a long absence, calibrated to look casual but loaded with intent, all of it designed to produce the reactions they used to get from you. None of it lands, and this is disorienting to them in a way that is hard to overstate, because their entire playbook is built on knowing how you respond. They have spent significant time and energy learning your patterns, mapping your triggers, understanding the specific levers that produce the specific reactions they want. That knowledge was power. It meant they could always get a response when they needed one. But you don't respond to those levers anymore. Not because you're performing indifference, because you genuinely don't feel the pull the same way you used to. The healing you've done, the clarity you've built, the distance you've established, all of it has changed the underlying architecture of how you process what they throw at you. There is a particular kind of moment that happens when someone has done real inner work, when a situation that used to send you spiraling now lands, and you simply look at it, you see it clearly, you recognize the tactic, you feel the intention behind it, and then, and this is the part they cannot understand because they have never experienced it, you choose not to be moved, not because you are suppressing a reaction, because the reaction they were counting on is genuinely no longer there. That is the shift. That is what they are bumping against when they try to reach you now. Not a wall of willpower you are straining to hold in place, just the quiet reality that who they are dealing with now is not who they were dealing with before, and the version they built their approach around, that version graduated, left the building, moved on to a life that doesn't require tolerating what you used to tolerate. They're hitting a wall that wasn't there before. And the wall isn't anger, it isn't defense, it isn't even conscious effort on your part, it is just who you have become. Here is what this does to a manipulator. It forces them to confront their own limitations, because if their methods don't work on you, then either they need better methods which they don't have, or they need to accept that you are now beyond what they can reach. And accepting that means accepting that they have lost something they believed they owned. They didn't own it. They never did, but they believed they did, and that belief was everything. Now it's gone, and what's replaced it is something they did not budget for: respect. The grudging, unwilling, infuriating kind of respect that comes from realizing you have been outmaneuvered by someone you underestimated. You did not demand that respect. You built it, in the quiet, off their radar. While they were busy managing their version of events, you were becoming someone their version can no longer contain. They are starting to realize that you are not coming back, not to the version of the dynamic they controlled, not to the reactive, available, accessible version of yourself that their whole approach depended on, not to the relationship, the situation, the interaction in the form it previously existed. That version of things is over. Not dramatically, not explosively, just over. And the full weight of that finality is pressing down on them now like something they cannot lift. Think about what they are actually losing. Not just you as a person, though, that too, but the specific function you served. You were a source of validation, of significance, of the particular kind of power that comes from knowing you can affect someone. the ability to reach into your world and move things, the confirmation that they were still relevant to you, still a factor, still someone whose presence in your life meant something. All of that is gone. And for someone who built their sense of self around their role in your life, gone is not just loss, it is identity collapse. They may never say this out loud, they will probably perform their way through it, loudly insisting they don't care, finding new audiences for the version of events that casts them as the wronged party, moving on visibly, ostentatiously, in ways that are clearly designed to be seen. All of it is noise over signal. All of it is the performance of someone who is not okay. And underneath the performance, the realization is sinking in. Here is the specific thing that is eating at them, the realization that sits beneath all the noise and the posturing and the desperate attempts to reframe what happened. It is this: you were replaceable to them in terms of function. If they needed someone to manipulate, they could find someone else. If they needed an audience for their performance, there are always other audiences, but they are not replaceable to you in the same way. Not because you loved them so much you can't move on, but because the version of yourself that tolerated them was a version you will never go back to. They are not losing a person, they are losing the last window into a version of you that no longer exists, the version they could read, the version they could reach, the version they could on some level manage. That version is gone, and they cannot manufacture a replacement. They cannot find their way back to access over someone who has fundamentally outgrown the dynamic that gave them access in the first place. The door didn't just close, the room it led to no longer exists. That is the kind of loss that hits the ego at its foundation. It forces them to accept that they were never as essential to you as they believed, that the hold they thought they had was never hold at all, that they were never as significant to your story as they cast themselves in their own mind. The silence isn't something they can wait out. It's not a storm that passes. They're beginning to understand that it's the climate now. It's the new atmosphere. And if the door that closed is truly locked, then what they're facing isn't just an ending. It's exile from a version of your life that has left them behind entirely. And they know somewhere deep in the honest place where people can't lie to themselves that you are not the one losing here. They are. When you were accessible, they could manage their relationship to you easily. A check-in here, a calculation there, always enough information to feel like they had the full picture. They knew where you were, they knew how you were feeling, they knew what was happening in your world. And that knowledge, that easy, constant, frictionless access to your life, gave them the illusion of control that every person like this needs. When you removed that access, the gap it left did not stay empty. The human mind abhors a vacuum, and the mind of someone who has lost control of a person they believe they controlled is a mind that immediately starts working overtime to fill the space with something, with information, with speculation, with observation, with the obsessive piecing together of every available fragment, trying to reconstruct the full picture they used to have automatically. They are watching everything now, not directly. They have too much pride for that, or at least too much performance of pride, but indirectly, through mutual connections, through whatever traces of your presence they can still observe, through the way people talk about you, through the changes they notice in you when your paths cross, through the things you don't say as much as the things you do. Because they don't have real information, their mind is generating its own, and the stories the mind generates in the absence of real information are almost always larger than reality. In their imagination, you are moving, building, making plays they can't see, meeting people they don't know, becoming something they didn't account for. Every unknown becomes a potential breakthrough. Every unanswered question becomes a door to something significant. The mystery you have created entirely as a byproduct of simply focusing on your own life has made you larger in their mind than you ever were when they had access. They used to see you clearly, which meant they could keep you small in their estimation. Now they can't see you at all, and things you can't see have a way of growing enormous in the dark. You have become, without trying, the most interesting thing in their world. They wanted to be the center of your focus. Instead, you have become the center of theirs. And you did it by simply redirecting your attention to where it actually belongs, your own life, your own growth, your own becoming. Now we arrive at the revelation that reframes everything. The thing that when they finally see it clearly will be the most unsettling discovery they have ever made about you. While they were managing the story, while they were tending the narrative, while they were doing everything in their power to control the version of you that existed in other people's minds, the actual you was somewhere else entirely, becoming someone they have no framework for. You have been building. In the quiet they mistook for collapse, but in the stillness they read as defeat. You have been doing the deepest, most consequential work of your life, not performing it, not documenting it, not broadcasting any of it for validation or approval or proof, just doing it. Every day that they were occupied with the old narrative, you added to the new one. Every day they stayed in the dynamic of who you used to be, you moved further into who you are becoming. And the gap between those two things, between their outdated version of you and your actual current reality, has been widening every single day. They can feel the edges of this gap even if they cannot see the whole thing. When they encounter you now, there is something different, something in the way you hold yourself that wasn't there before, a quality of ease and rootedness and settled certainty that is impossible to fake and impossible to ignore. The old triggers don't land, the old dynamics don't engage. The old version of you that used to be so reliably available for their maneuvers is simply not present anymore. And the version that is present, they don't have a playbook for it. Here is why this is the most dangerous thing you have ever been to them. Everything they built their approach on depended on knowing you, knowing your patterns, your responses, your vulnerabilities, your needs. That knowledge was the foundation, and now the foundation is obsolete. Everything they built on top of it, every tactic, every angle, every prepared move, is built on knowledge of someone who no longer exists in the form they understood. You have outgrown their entire model of you, and you did it so quietly that by the time they realized it was happening, it was already done. In the beginning they were the ones who had the power, they had access, they had your reactions, they had the narrative, they had the playbook. They were the architects of a dynamic designed to keep you in a particular position, present, available, reactive, and just uncertain enough about yourself to keep participating. Now look at where each of those things stands. Access revoked. They cannot reach you the way they used to. Not because you are hiding, because you have moved to a level that their old methods cannot locate. Your reactions, no longer theirs to command. What used to be automatic is now deliberate. What used to be reflexive is now chosen. They throw sparks and they hit water. Nothing catches. The narrative, no longer theirs to control, because the most powerful narrative in the room is not the one spoken the loudest, it is the one lived the most truthfully. And the life you are living now, the quiet, focused, accelerating, undeniable life you are building in the space their chaos used to occupy, that life is telling a story that no competing version can outrun. The playbook, useless, because it was written for a version of you that no longer exists. This is the transformation, not of the situation, of you. The situation has been handled by the simple act of you becoming too large and too clear and too intentional for it to contain anymore. You didn't resolve the conflict. You outgrew it. You didn't defeat your enemies. You became someone your enemies cannot reach. And here is what chosen ones do with that realization. Not arrogance, not a performance of untouchability for anyone's benefit, not revenge designed to prove a point that the truth is already proving on your behalf. Just this, you keep building, you keep rising, you keep pouring that tremendous, powerful, focused energy, the energy that used to leak out in all directions, managing everyone else's chaos into the life you were always meant to be living. Every unanswered message is a brick in the foundation of your peace. Every ignored provocation is fuel redirected into your purpose. Every moment you chose stillness over their storm is a deposit into a future they cannot imagine for you, because they have never seen you fully unleashed in the direction of your own life. You are not building this future for them. You are not building it to prove anything. You are not building it to be seen or validated or vindicated, though all of that will come. You are building it because it was always yours to build. Because the vision that has lived inside you, the one that kept whispering even when everything around you was trying to drown it out, that vision was not accidental. It was placed in you on purpose, for a purpose, and the quiet you've been living in has been the incubator, the space where that vision gets strong enough to survive contact with the world. The most dangerous person in any room went quiet. And while everyone was busy deciding what the quiet meant, while they were misreading it, underestimating it, building their strategies around a version of you that the quiet was busy dissolving, the actual you was becoming something they had no category for, not louder, deeper, not more visible, more intentional, not more aggressive, more certain. The kind of certain that does not need to announce itself, the kind of certain that walks into a room and changes the temperature without saying a word. That is what your silence built, not just distance from them, not just protection from their chaos, an entirely different version of yourself, one that operates from a completely different foundation, one that cannot be manipulated because it does not need anything from its manipulators, one that cannot be destabilized because its stability comes from within, not from outside approval or outside validation or outside confirmation that you are who you know you are. They thought the silence was the end. It was the beginning. They thought the quiet was weakness. It was loading. They thought you were retreating. You were taking aim. And what is in the crosshairs is not them. It was never them. The crosshairs are on everything you are building, everything you are becoming, every door that is opening because you finally stopped carrying people who were never meant to go where you are going. The most dangerous person in any room is the one who went quiet. The most powerful move you ever made was the silence they mistook for surrender. And the roar that is coming, the full, undeniable, unmistakable arrival of who you actually are into the life that was always meant to be yours, will not need an announcement. It will simply be undeniable. Stay quiet, chosen one. Stay focused. Stay dangerous. The world is about to find out exactly who they were dealing with all along, and it will be extraordinary.